The presentation of Anarchism, a social philosophy which aims at the emancipation, economic, social, political, and spiritual of the human race. The emancipation.
Anarchist Essays is brought to you by Loughborough University's Anarchism Research Group. For more information on the ARG, see the link in the show notes or follow us on Twitter at ARGLBORO.
The Writings of Colin Ward and the Legacy of Anarchism for Housing Studies, Keith Jacobs. This essay discusses the limited presence of anarchist writings in housing scholarship, focusing on British anarchist Colin Ward. It critiques the common misconceptions about anarchism, such as its association with violent protest and the overthrow of the state, and highlights its potential to offer alternative forms of organisation and social solidarity. The essay argues that local interventions, while valuable, often lack sufficient funding to address large-scale housing challenges. This perspective aligns with critiques of localist interventions in addressing homelessness, which emphasise the need for proper funding from central government to make a significant impact. Colin Ward was a significant figure in anarchist thought, contributing extensively to discussions on housing architecture and mutual aid. He advocated for everyday anarchism, emphasizing practical interventions over revolutionary activities. Ward's work focused on enhancing individual autonomy and reducing dependence on external authority. He contributed to the anarchist journal Freedom and edited the monthly journal Anarchy from 1961 to 1970. Ward's influence extended internationally, particularly among community activists in Europe and America, despite his reluctance to accept invitations to speak overseas. Ward's approach to anarchism was rooted in practical everyday actions rather than future-orientated revolutionary activities. He believed that anarchist practices were already happening and did not require the overthrow of capitalism to be realized. Here Ward's views shared similarities with Rosa Luxemburg's critique of the Bolshevik Revolution, emphasizing the importance of ongoing power conflicts and the need for continuous social change. The essay situates Ward's work within the context of the British social democratic post-war settlement from 1945 to the mid-1970s. During this period, the two main political parties in the UK were broadly committed to Keynesian economic management and the welfare state. Left-wing writers had the confidence to critique the welfare state, assuming it would remain largely intact. However, few anticipated the long-term consequences of privatisation policies and spending cuts imposed during Margaret Thatcher's tenure. From the late 1950s to the 1970s, there was a growing interest in self-expression and individual autonomy. Influential figures during this period, including the political theorist John Rawls and Robert Nozick, anti-psychiatry critics such as Thomas Sachs, David Cooper, and R.D. Laing, literary scholars Raymond Williams and Richard Hoggart, and community campaigner Michael Young. Ward, like R.D. Laing and Michael Young, was critical of bureaucratic control and supportive of alternative ways to disperse power away from the welfare state. His focus on cooperatives and self-built housing resonated with other critical contributions of the time. Ward's writing contrasted with the more defensive approaches of many left-wing commentators following the Conservative Party's victory in the 1997 UK general elections. While Ward was critical of government expenditure cuts, he argued that political energy should be directed towards developing the social realm in which people live their lives. He challenged the assumption that the social and political realms are interchangeable, emphasizing the importance of informal, everyday social interactions. Ward was critical of the state's role in welfare provision, viewing it as paternalistic and judgmental. He argued that social welfare could exist without the state through mutual aid and self-help. Ward justifies this claim by highlighting historical examples of cooperatives and mutual societies in 19th and early 20th century British society. However, he acknowledged that these mutual societies were insufficient to address large-scale poverty, and the creation of the welfare state after World War II led to significant improvements in health, education, and housing outcomes. Despite his criticisms, Ward recognised some productive role of the state, such as providing critical infrastructure and community safety. However, he was unimpressed by arguments that a functioning democratic state was necessary to advance equality and freedom. Ward dismissed the value of voting in general elections and argued that establishing new forms of living independently from the state was more important. He was influenced by anarchist thinkers like Gustav Landauer and Martin Buber, who emphasized the importance of social principles and spontaneous actions that support mutual needs. Ward believed that the absence of social forms of activity allowed the state to extend its paternalistic and bureaucratic approach, leading to tenants feeling grateful and subservient. He argued that rediscovering the freedom that comes from human agency and sociality was essential to counteract the state's power abuses. Ward's commitment to spontaneity and the social was rooted in anarchist theory, drawing from thinkers like Peter Kropotkin and Gustav Landauer. Ward's writing on housing emphasized dweller control and critiqued both private landlordism and bureaucratic public housing. He supported cooperative housing and self-built housing as alternatives. Ward was critical of the Labour Party's municipalisation policy, which he believed embedded dependency and resentment. He argued that paternalistic, top-down interventions in public housing were a significant challenge and advocated for tenant participation and mutual aid. Ward's defence of owner-occupation was controversial, as he saw it as a triumphant example of self-help and mutual aid. He criticised sections of the British left for their disdain towards owner-occupiers and argued that private property, when used for personal purposes, was not inherently evil. Ward preferred cooperative takeovers of public housing, where tenants collectively managed their estates rather than selling off public housing. Ward refrained from advocating for the dismantling of the welfare state, recognising its importance in providing infrastructure and resources. He quoted anarchist architect John Turner, who acknowledged the central role of central government in delivering essential provision. Ward argued that public housing in its current form was reactive and detracted from more pressing tasks, such as developing locally situated social practices. Ward's critique of the modern state and its role in providing housing can be contrasted with much of the academic literature on UK housing policy. From the 1980s onwards, housing scholarship focused on critiquing the privatisation of public housing and identifying its problematic effects. Ward, unlike some left-wing commentators, did not see tenants as problematic subjects needing government assistance. Instead, he viewed them as active agents capable of sustaining meaningful change. In an open letter to the UK Minister for the Environment in 1976, Ward criticised the paternalism of the post-welfare state and argued for a serious engagement with tenants to address housing problems. He believed that tenant participation was essential, but acknowledged that it alone could not transform long-standing issues related to resource allocation. Ward saw practical tasks, such as squatting, as a way to repair dysfunctional social arrangements. He differentiated between squatting as a political demonstration and as a personal solution to housing problems. Ward believed that squatting could lead to more productive living arrangements and forms of solidarity among people experiencing homelessness. However, his view of squatting was often unqualified and lacked empirical evidence. Ward's emphasis on mutual aid and self-housing was situated within capitalist relations, and he failed to acknowledge the limitations of these practices in addressing large-scale housing challenges. He argued that tenants already possessed the necessary expertise for cooperation and resource sharing, but this expertise was often unacknowledged by state bureaucrats. Ward was concerned that bureaucrats might reappropriate participation practices and incorporate them into a larger welfare state. This essay highlighted the limited engagement with Ward's ideas in housing. It discussed 3 articles directly that engaged with Ward's work: Hodgkinson, 2012, Allen, 2016, and Bauer, 2017. These 3 articles all explore anarchist approaches to housing, the role of academic research, and the potential of informal housing settlements. Hodgkinson's article contrasted anarchism with Marxism, arguing that anarchism offers practical interventions that can have greater impact on ameliorating exploitation. He discusses the relevance of anarchist architect John Turner's critique of government bureaucracy in Latin America and its role in constraining slum dwellers' capabilities. Hodgkinson emphasizes the importance of tenant control and mutual forms of home ownership. Allen's article used anarchism as a theoretical lens to reflect on the activity of academic research. He argues that an anarchist approach can be more democratic and break down the divide between academics and marginalized communities. Allen emphasizes the importance of acknowledging the contribution of marginalized communities and conducting research in non-hierarchical and egalitarian ways. Bauer's article focuses on Ward's engagement with informal housing settlements in the UK during the 1940s and 50s. He discusses the aspirations and life of do-it-yourself builders and the potential of these practices to address the shortage of affordable housing. Bauer highlights Ward's view that individuals have surrendered their power to the state and need to reclaim it through mutual aid and self-help. This essay concludes by criticizing Ward's anarchist perspective, drawing on the criticisms from Dobraskic and David Harvey. Here I argue that Ward overstated the transformative potential of local anarchist practice and failed to address broader structural challenges. My critique also highlights the limitations of Ward's views on individual autonomy and the role of the state. Hodgkinson and Bauer provide strong theoretical accounts of Colin Ward's views on anarchism and the housing crisis, while Allen offers a more introspective analysis of how academics engage with housing topics in disadvantaged households. However, these articles do not critically examine Ward's anarchist position. This gap is addressed by summarizing criticisms from Dobraskic and Harvey. Dobraskic criticizes Ward's overestimation of the transformative potential of local anarchist practices, arguing that they can lead to disengagement from broader social struggles. He suggests that small-scale actions can coexist with larger struggles. Harvey produces a trenchant critique, noting that while social anarchists are sensitive to space, place, and environment, they lack a coherent theory and are ill-equipped to address the inequalities of capitalism. He argues that the anarchist organizational structures are impractical at larger scales and criticizes their disdain for organized power structures and a simplistic view of the state. Harvey also highlights the anarchist failure to mobilize for broader political activism and their overemphasis on decentralization. He argues that anarchists overlook the productive role of the state in establishing essential infrastructure, and that their commitment to horizontal structures is often inappropriate. Harvey's concerns about anarchist practice are valid, but his criticism of geographical scale can be applied to all organizational arrangements. Ward's housing analysis reveals his anxiety about technocratic power and a romanticized view of individual capacity to achieve significant change through small groups. He underestimated the need for strategic government intervention in the housing crisis. Ward's version of localism also overlooks the benefit of bureaucratic allocation systems, which ensure fairness and transparency. He also failed to acknowledge the potential of welfare services to advance social cohesion. Ward's romanticized view of public housing tenants and his belief in the transformative power of debates on emotive topics are problematic. He assumes that many problems are amenable to dialogue and resolution, which is not always the case. Ward's idea of individual freedom is too narrow, as individuals are always interconnected with others and their environment. In conclusion, Ward's view of anarchism promotes a society that continually reinvents itself to meet changing needs. He emphasizes experimentation, sociality, cooperation, and collective politics outside of state provision. And while Ward's writings offer valuable insights for contemporary housing challenges, his solutions are not easily applicable to large housing issues. Nevertheless, his ideas encourage us to seek new ways to address housing problems and work through difficulties in fashioning new social relations.
Thank you for listening. To help others find anarchist essays, please rate and review us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're interested in anarchist ideas, why not check out the journal Anarchist Studies? For over 20 years, Anarchist Studies has been publishing original research on the history, theory, and practice of anarchism. For more information, visit www.lwbooks.co.uk/anarchist-studies.